Got it. Okay. And we are on live, and with me, I have the re-elected leader of the DA. Actually, we can just talk about you as the leader, but being re-elected during the past weekend at the DA's Federal Congress. Congratulations, John Steenhuisen.
Thank you, Isak. It must have been that lucky Nuspot Droevos that I had on this.
Yeah, you must remember that is my favorite butchery in the one of my favorite butchers in the country. The other one is Grobler's Hoop, but they sell the best Droevos in the country.
And I must agree, it was absolutely delicious.
Machado Dor, whenever you go past it, don't pass Machado Dor butchery. But anyway, John, thank you for having me. It's nice to be able to talk to you after this weekend, and you made some interesting points, points that are being talked about since Sunday during your acceptance speech, and I want to talk to you about at least the idea of a Moonshot Pact. Something that is already being debated very hotly in the press. So let's start off with that.
Sure, ready when you are.
The Moonshot Pact. Just explain to the people that still doesn't understand what it entails.
Well, a moonshot always used to be referred to as a long shot, but it's increasingly being used to describe a momentous effort to achieve a goal and a giant leap forward. And I think that's precisely what we need in South Africa if we're going to get off this terrible trajectory of unemployment, of poverty, of hunger, and of poor economic growth, and to get South Africa onto a new trajectory of hope and prosperity. What I've been very clear about is that the DA is not able to do this on our own, and that we believe that what we need to build in South Africa is an ecosystem of change that will be used to be able to unseat the ANC, keep the EFF out of government, and usher in hopefully a new government made up of like-minded opposition parties who've come together in a pact, not folding all of our identities into one party, but each party retaining its own identity, but making a pact that we will work together to unseat the ANC and keep the EFF out, and also to be able to start describing to South Africans what the priorities of the pact would be going into the government. I think that the problem that we've had, particularly in 2021, is that there was no coordination by the opposition parties, and people were unsure about what to expect. Also, some of the coalitions, and I really do stress the sum of the coalitions, have obviously given people some pause for thought about are coalitions a viable way forward. We hope to be able to inspire hope, optimism, and finally a sense that we can work together. Look, the only other option is that we can all go on our way and do our own thing and hope for the best. But what I've learned in politics is that hope is not always a strategy. And I think it's precisely the lack of strategy and tactics and coordination amongst the opposition parties that has led to the ANC being able to entrench itself. So what I'm essentially doing is calling for a reset in the opposition relationships, where we can surely come together or attempt to come together and find the things that we agree on that will bind us to committing ourselves to this Moonshot Pact to be able to unseat the ANC and keep the EFF out.
One should think that it must be an idea that excites everyone wanting the ANC unseated. But that was not the fact, as was evident over the past couple of days, talking to the Freedom Front Plus and Herman Mashaba on Sunday immediately after I left the Congress. Both of them said immediately that they want to warn the DA not to play Big Brother here, and this is not a new idea. This is something that we actually have started some time before. Your reaction on this, please, John.
Well, We were never invited to any of these so-called talks. And let me just make it very, very clear that any talks that don't involve the DA are an academic exercise. The DA is by far and away the largest political party. And if you take those parties that said they were talking to each other, it's less than 10% of the vote. We've got to get to 51%. And whether you like the DA or not, the DA is going to be the anchor of the new coalition organization, because we are by far and away the biggest party. I mean, we are sitting at almost 22%. The next closest opposition party is the EFF with 11%. So, and all the other parties are much smaller than that. So I've said to them very clearly, there can be no rainbow coalition or Moonshot Pact that doesn't have the DA at the heart of it. Secondly, I would say that it is time now to leave the egos, the past enmities at the door, and admit the DA has made mistakes in the past. I'm happy to admit that, and I said as much in the speech on Sunday. But it is now time for a reset in our politics, and it's time now for us to set out new relationships, leaving the politics of the past behind us. I have no interest in being big brother. I don't want to subsume those smaller parties. But what I do want to do is to be brothers in arms with those parties to see if we can unseat the ANC and keep the EFF out in the next election.
I think this is a big question for voters overall, John. Is we have seen with the trying to form coalitions after the municipal elections of 2016 and as well as 2021. The instability of it. You saying that this have the possibility of stabilizing it on firmer ground. But the bickering between parties, we as voters see, and I think the question then is, are you really able, you as political parties, whether you are the bigger one, whether you are the smaller one, are you really able to stabilize in such a manner that we as voters can really trust a coalition?
I would like to think we can, and that's precisely why I've called the leaders of the political parties together. I've said, let us as leaders of our organizations sit around a table and decide, can we end the bickering? Can we end all of this behavior in which only the ANC wins? Can we put our egos aside, and can we focus for once on the people who matter the most in this democracy, and that is the voters. And I think that voters are sick to their back teeth watching opposition parties squabble amongst themselves while the ANC pushes us further and further down the path to ruin as a country. And so I'm saying to all of these leaders, let's sit down, let's be mature and constructive, and let's talk it out. If it can't be done, well, then we must go and be honest with the voters that it's not possible for us to do it. But if it can be done, let's link arms and show South Africa that we are serious about the future of the country and that we are determined to show the internal discipline within a pact to be able to work together in a constructive way that sets out a new path for our future. And I think that opposition parties are entitled to their view. If they don't want to come to the meeting, if leaders don't want to come to the meeting, that's fine, Isak, that's their business. But I think they're going to have a lot of explaining to do to donors and to voters about why they don't want to be a part of the very best shot that we have of ending the ANC's rule and keeping the EFF out of the union buildings.
Don't you think we should just make Herman Mashaba the leader of this pact and get it over with? So let's get to work.
I think it's premature to start talking about who's going to be leaders and who's going to be presidential candidates and who's going to be put forward for this position or that position. That's completely premature. I think the very first step, not putting the cart before the horse, is to sit around a table, eyeball to eyeball, as leaders, and say, can we make this work? Is this something that we can do? And if we can't, well, as I said, we've got to be honest that it's not going to work, and we must all go our separate ways and see where the chips fall in 2024. But bear in mind, there's literally 14 days that you have after the election results are certified to elect a government and to elect a president. I would advance that 14 days is wholly insufficient time to sit down and negotiate something that could work. So why don't we do it up front? This is precisely what Turkey's opposition is busy doing now to unseat Erdogan. It's what the Indian opposition are busy doing right now. And so I think it is premature to sit and worry about who's going to be the leader and who's going to sit on a throne. And so let's leave that for later down the line. Let's start at first principles. Can we, as leaders, leave egos at the door, leave past scars from previous battles and experiences at the door, and can we just look at whether we can work together to build a blueprint to save South Africa?
Michael Beaumont sent out a tweet this morning stating that over the weekend you mentioned the Moonshot Pact and the wish to unseat the ANC, but in a 702 interview, which I haven't heard, but Michael claims that you said that you are still willing to consider some sort of coalition talks with the ANC. Your reaction on that, please.
Well, again, this is exactly the small politics that doesn't take us forward. And I would urge all opposition parties that now's the time for maturity. If anybody listened carefully to what I said in my speech on Sunday, I said our first priority is a Moonshot Pact with like-minded opposition parties that share common values and principles to unseat the ANC. But I also said that if this is not possible, if this does not work, that I will do everything in my power and my party's power to prevent an ANC-EFF doomsday coalition. And I said in that instance, we may be faced with the least worst option, but that's not my priority. My priority over the next 15 months is working to unseat the ANC and to build a coalition with like-minded parties. And at the risk of not wanting to get down into the petty politics, I would say that if one listens to the revelations made by Bongani Baloyi upon his departure, it was in fact Michael and Herman who were talking to the ANC about a potential deal in the metros, not the Democratic Alliance. But that is in the past. That's history. It's now time for us to leave all that behind us, draw a line in the sand, and let's focus on the arts of the possible. What is possible for us to achieve for our country by working constructively together? And I think that parties need to judge this moment carefully. This is a broad and generous offer. This is the Democratic Alliance saying, yes, we've made mistakes in the past and we haven't always been perfect, but for goodness sake, there's a lot at stake here. It's really the future of the country. Can't we just for once put our heads together in a constructive way and come up with a plan to save our country?
Some of the critics of this idea says that this is playing on the verge of John, what is vrees in English?
Fear?
I forgot. Fear. On fear politics. What do you think about it?
No, I don't think it's about fear. I think it's about realism. Let me be clear. One only has to look at every other country in the world where the EFF's policies have been applied. From Zimbabwe to Venezuela to Cuba, the Marxist Chavez-style politics has led to poverty, it's led to disinvestment, it's led to hunger, and in Venezuela's case, the largest human displacement in modern history. Those policies are deadly for South Africa, and they will accelerate us down the path towards a failed state. If we start nationalizing land without compensation, if we start nationalizing banks and mines and the like, South Africa is going one way, and that's the same way that every other country that's tried that has gone. And that's, I believe, a warning that South Africans need to understand, which is why the clarion call was made. For goodness sake, if you're not registered, make sure you're registered. If you are a voter who's not voted, make sure you get out and vote, because there's everything to play for in this next election. And let's use that democracy while we still can to affect positive change in the country.
There's also the question of you declaring the EFF as enemy number one for the DA. Some analysts over the weekend said that that might be a mistake, and that you are, with this, actually focusing the EFF's attention on the DA.
I don't believe that's the case. And I do fundamentally believe that the EFF and their policies are public enemy number one. They practice the politics of race division, of violence, of disorder and chaos, firing automatic weapons at rallies, attacking people from other race groups. If they get into power, that politics of chaos and destruction and division will be at the heart of our government. And I think that it would make what's happened in Zimbabwe and other places look like a dress rehearsal. We've already seen the race-baiting comments of Mr. Malema, for which he never apologizes, attacking different people of different races, of different cultural groups. We've seen the policies and politics of the EFF trying to shut down the country in the midst of an economic crisis. Do we really want to let the politics of chaos, disorder, and division into the union buildings? I think not. And I think we must warn South Africans about what lies ahead if that happens. The EFF have displayed, whether it's their behavior in Parliament to the behavior on the streets of South Africa, that they are interested in one thing and one thing only, and that's the politics of disorder, chaos, and destruction and division.
John, there are still media that wants to load the race issue on the shoulders of the DA, also saying that the DA is not going to do very well in the coming elections. There's even one that said that you will probably get 17%. But I would like to give you the opportunity of telling us what happened to the DA since 2019 up to now. What did you see change and improve while some media keep on criticizing the DA?
Isak, let me be very clear. It is the same critics and the same analysts who write the DA off in every single election. Do you remember when COPE burst onto the scene and we were told that they were going to now be the official opposition in the country and they were going to displace the DA as the second biggest party? Well, it didn't happen. And then the EFF burst on the scene and you had people saying like, well, they're going to be the next big thing and bigger than the DA. And then you had the 2019 election where many news outlets said, and I'll never forget the one banner headline, the death of the DA. And as I keep saying, Keku Leikons, no, we are a party that's growing. We're a party that's diverse. We have by far the most diverse voter group. The Social Research Foundation shows that it's roughly thirds, third black, third colored, a third white. There's no other party that can claim that. And I also get really frustrated that the race burden is always placed on our shoulders only. Yet the parties to the left and right of us are monochromatic. The ANC's top six are all black. The Freedom Front's top six are all white. The Economic Freedom Fighters' top six are all black. And we're there on the middle, black, white, Indian, colored, all represented in the DA's top leadership, allied with our 9 provincial leaders who are all from diverse race backgrounds, and our federal executive and federal council, which are far more diverse than the ANC's NEC. So I don't think it's fair that we have the race burden. What have we done since 2019? Well, since 2019, we've set about firmly rooting the DA back in its values and principles of non-racialism, respect for the rule of law and the Constitution, a social market economy that treats business and industry as partners in the jobs agenda and growth agenda, and building a capable state free of corruption and cadre deployment. Those are the core values and principles. We then built a policy suite around those values and principles. And we now have a very firm policy position on things like growing the economy, on economic empowerment, on fighting crime, on building local governments. And thirdly, a laser beam focus on driving issues that matter to ordinary South Africans. The things that people are talking around the braaivleis, the Shisanyama, the water cooler at the office of Block and Sandton, things like the spiraling cost of living, things like fuel prices, things like food prices that are spiraling completely out of control, things like crime and criminality and how we keep people safe, things like load shedding. And not only are we talking about those issues, we're putting on the table workable solutions in each of those cases. that show South Africans that we're serious about them and serious about the issues that matter to them. And I believe that a relentless focused campaign on these issues going into the election, along with solutions, and then most importantly, along with the proof points that we now have where we govern, I think makes a very compelling election message. I think we're going to do very well in this election, and I think that we're going to once again, for the umpteenth time, prove our critics wrong.
Percentage-wise?
Well, I'd be happy with any growth on the 2021 election, anything above 22%. But the way we're looking at our polling at the moment, we've been sitting at 26% in the polls. I think that we can do better than that with an election, a good election result. And if people unite around the DA as the best way to stop the EFF from gaining the keys of the union building and ensuring that there is a strong, stable anchor tenant in any Moonshot Pact post-2024.
Last question, John. We don't have too much time, unfortunately. One will have to lie saying that your Federal Congress this weekend wasn't impressive. It was above impressive. The efficiency, the way how you kept to time, the organization of it. But the big question above it all, is your party able to save us from the ANC?
Absolutely. That's a resounding yes. And I think that was on display this weekend was a modern, compassionate, diverse party where all South Africans came together to be able to show South Africa what this party is capable of. We have a record of action in government. We've got a promise of more. We've got great plans to save the country. But most of all, it is the dedication and drive of every single one of our public reps, activists, branch members, constituency heads to get out there and save South Africa. Now all we need is South Africans to play their part, which is why I cannot emphasize enough. Visit the IEC website today. Make sure you're registered. It is very simple. Check your registration status. And mostly, for goodness sake, don't stay at home, because every citizen needs to know that the country's future is now in their hands. We are ready, but we can't do it alone. We need the support of the voters to come out and strengthen our arm so that we can continue to fight for them.
John Steenhuisen, leader of the DA, thank you very much for making time for us, and all the best.
Always a pleasure, Isak, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you and your viewers today.
Keep well.